Throughout human civilization, trillions of people have lived on this planet. During these eons, a few special folk have managed to transcend this boundary of obscurity and become famous or well known. Nowadays, a great majority of the population are documented on at least some level. There are still people who don't have that luxury, of course, but for the most part, it's safe to say that your information, as well as everyone else's, rests comfortably in the hands of credible and trustworthy individuals. While your popularity really depends on a lot of things nowadays, there are quite a lot of cases throughout history where infamy is achieved through obscurity. If these past few centuries of entertainment has shown us anything, it's that we all love a good mystery. From detective novels to true crime podcasts, humanity's endless hunger for the unknown has been graciously fed via various media, using cases of pure bloodshed or silent disappearance. In between these tales, there exist those whose names have been lost to time itself. How do you even become famous for not having a name anyway? Well, that is exactly what all these folks throughout history said to answer, whether intentionally or unintentionally. This video will be similar to my previous Evangelion video in terms of how it covers each subject, so keep this in mind as we finally delve into the unknown phases of history. Well, if we're to go chronologically, what better way to start off than to begin with literally ancient Egypt? Now, the list of Egyptian pharaohs is a complex one that has taken centuries of paperwork and analyzing various historical documents. According to most sources, the general list is mostly complete. However, there are some rulers whose names are so weird and so out of place, it makes you wonder if they even existed, like Hudjefa I. Hudjefa ruled the second dynasty of Egypt, sometime in the 2800s BC. And we know he existed thanks to two sources, a stone that chronicles 58 rulers of ancient Egypt in reverse chronological order, and another chronicle that does a similar thing but with 150 more rulers. Although the latter one is very damaged, so we don't really know what most of it says. The reign of this dude lasted for about 11 years, during which seemingly nothing happened. Well, to be fair, he isn't exactly special in that regard. This lack of information is par for the course for a lot of early pharaohs. Name only, nothing about the reign. However, this guy is fascinating for a single reason. In both sources that give us his name, they actually lack his name. Let me explain. Hudjefa means removed in ancient Egyptian. Now, who the hell would be named removed the first in those times? Because there's no Hudjefa II. Well, actually there is, but that guy has since been identified. Kaba, also known as Hudjefa II, was another ruler from the next dynasty over. Now, Kaba's old deal is also very confusing because his successor may have been the same guy as him for reasons I can't even begin to understand, but rest assured we have that guy's name. However, the other Hudjefa is a big mystery. Linking unnamed pharaohs of any sort in ancient sources is tricky. Very, very tricky. We have a few dozen guesses for the Genesis pharaoh for God's sake, and that was written closer to our time. Imagine how hard it would be to track down old no-name over here. Before we continue, I'd like to conclude this segment with some theories. This guy's name may very well have been censored by future dynasties, as a political power move that basically stated, "Ha! No-name dweeb, you don't matter, get lost." Whatever the case may be, it's not unheard of in their historiography, so that may very well have been the case. No, I didn't skip anything. This is actually the not name of an Athenian dude that painted a whole shit ton of vases in the BC times. A lot of you are probably familiar with these iconic black and red vases already, but did you know there was one guy who did more than 400 of these? The way art historians identify and give names to the artists behind these pieces is quite interesting. They see a couple artworks with key details and give the unknown artists names based on specific vases. That's why the Berlin painter is called that. His name base, as it's called, is one from Berlin. His style is unique and very innovative for this line of work. A lot of it can be found in Italy, surprisingly, probably due to his vases being trade items. He was considered to be one of the greatest vase painters of his day, and even trained a few other folks if their stuff from their art is anything to go by. With that being said, we literally have this guy's work and nothing else. But he's a great segue into something else, unidentified artists in general. You may have wondered what a not name was at the beginning because I kinda glossed over it. Basically, a not name is a title given to any artist whose name is actually unknown. It's used for easier classification, obviously. Turns out, not every painter can be a Leonardo, Botticelli, or a Giovanni Bonini. So art historians give these artists temporary names that are not their names. See what I mean? Usually these names come from a description of their work. When this artist comes from the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, they are given the epithet Master of, followed by something describing their work. For example, Master of the Blue Crosses, which is not the name of a symphonic metal band. It's, you guessed it, the not name of an artist who did loads of blue crosses back in the day, so that's his name. Or in the case of older artists, like I mentioned, they're just called place name painter. Honest to God, I have no idea how to conclude this segment, so transition. For this next one, we circle back to a topic that was mentioned in the previous video. The Dead Sea Scrolls strike back, and this time they bring out a mysterious priest in the history of Judaism. Apparently, this priest was a key player in the restoration of the sect, following the sack of Jerusalem carried out by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. During this period, apparently Jewish people were filled with so much guilt over how God's heart actually felt, that God himself apparently sent a teacher to fix the problem or something. This teacher of truth quickly gained a following in the distressed Jewish community of the time, so much so that he gained detractors, calling his teachings as illegal and not true to the word of God. Oh yeah, I should probably give you the origins of this fellow. According to the Damascus fragment, 390 years after the siege of Jerusalem, a plant root sprang up from there, and from that root came a guy, a fellow who would guide the Israelites to better things, a teacher of righteousness, if you will. His arrival signaled the resurgence of a mystical Jewish community called the Essenes, who are generally considered to be the true owners of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Essenes are their own rabbit hole full of actual historicity and connections to other religions, especially Christianity. It's clear this teacher of theirs was kind of like a Jesus figure to them. The stories of this guy being so deified in some of the scrolls lends credence to the Essene ownership theory, but this still doesn't resolve the grand mystery over who this guy could possibly be. Some suggest a known priest from the area, Onias III, who was deposed from office in 175 BC. Others declare John the Baptist as the true teacher of righteousness, based on key details such as the teacher preaching baptism and coming from the wilderness of Judea, although the timing would be a little off if that were the case. And to counter that argument, the John the Baptist people, or actually just one professor, dispute the actual dating of these scrolls, and also think they're written in code. The identity of this rightful educator remains a mystery in the Dead Sea Scrolls fandom, a term I just invented and probably already exists. We don't even know if this guy actually existed or not, which sucks, but that's a given when the document is sold. Continuing the theme of religious folks, this writer from the 6th century claimed to be Dionysus the Areopagite, a figure mentioned in the Bible as a guy who converted to Christianity and was noted for expanding the religion in Greece. This impostor probably had one of the strongest influences out of anyone in this video. His writings greatly changed Greek theology, and his mysticism were adopted by various European groups during the early modern period. The name he went with to identify himself led to a debate even back in the day when his writings began circulation across the Mediterranean. This, like many religious matters at the time, led to a big divide between truthers and non-believers. Eventually, sometime in the middle of the early modern period, the scholarly consensus reached a definitive conclusion that this guy had falsely claimed to be the biblical figure in order to either spread the tradition or something else entirely. Who's to say? We still haven't been able to figure this guy out. But his fake name does give way to a very interesting topic. Pseudo-people, writers and artsy people throughout history who falsely claimed or were wrongfully identified as other more well-known people. There's a smorgasbord of this kind of unknown individuals throughout many years. There's even a term for it, pseudoepigraphy. They are works falsely associated with Ovid, Plato, and even various biblical characters. If I covered every Wikipedia title that began with pseudo, this video would be even longer than it already is, so just take my word for it. It's very difficult attributing stuff to people in the first place. History gets ever so blurry the further back you go, until eventually reaching a zenith of pure obscurity. With that out of the way, that concludes the antiquity part of this video. Now, entering the Middle Ages, we finally begin to see an increase in attribution, which was thanks in large part to an increase in scribes and a more available historical record, but we still haven't arrived at the area where everyone of any status is painted. You can view it as kind of sort of a transition between the complete obscurity of the previous era and the more information we will start to have starting with the early modern period. First up, there's a medieval poem that is quite well known, from an author that represents a side of medieval living that is oft overlooked. As we enter this poet's repertoire, we enter into the satirical world of the Galliards. The Galliards were a collective of young clergymen who gleefully spent their free time engaging in and writing about the most debaucherous activity they could in that era. With an ethos that could very well be described as counterculture, this group of rebellious priests did such things as cross-dress and eat black pudding. Among these impostors of the faith, there lied one single individual, a peculiar fellow indeed. He contributed a couple poems before disappearing off the face of the earth. He decided to remain anonymous in his writings, possibly to avoid persecution from the very powerful church, which would easily evaporate him if they found out about his identity. So in his most valiant effort, he concedes. He confesses his sins to the whole wide world and admits, yeah, he's a bit of a strange fellow. Good my lord, the case is heard. I myself betray me, and affirm myself to be. All my fellows say me. See they in thy presence are, that where hath known his own heart and found it clean, cast at me at the stone. In stark contrast to everything else at the time, he not only criticizes those who oppose him, but he also laments his vices and virtues. From what we can gather from his writings, he had a prestigious background. In fact, he calls himself a Quartusa Militibus, literally translating to cut from soldiers, who lived around 1120 to 1165. Why this big of a gap? Well, in one of the writings attributed to him, he claims to be one of the Juvenes, and Juvenes back in the day meant a person between 20 and 40. According to him, he pursued a writing career instead of following in the footsteps of his background. While it's not very certain, most people associate him with Germany, since the people he worked around were typically German people. He mentions a few contemporaneous figures that help us with dating him to a certain period, particularly his patron, who flourished between 1159 and 1167, when he died, and also the same time when the Archpoet's writings ceased to exist. And that's really about it as far as we know. The only information we know about this guy comes directly from the man himself, and he only did a couple writings that we know of. There are theories about him that think his entire bibliography is one big commentary, not just a high-class priest, but his own counterculture. Regardless of who he actually was, we can definitely agree on one thing. This man was very ahead of his time, and I hope he's eating black puddings in the afterlife. In stark contrast to the previous century, this poet penned poems that were more in line with mainstream writers of his time. Coming to us a few centuries after our peculiar poet, this guy's entire career rests inside a single manuscript, MS Cotton Nero AX, also known as the Pearl Manuscript. This very cute document has many illustrations, as well as writings from an unknown person. This manuscript is kind of unusual because it is very sloppy, although it's one of the most well-known manuscripts in the entirety of Europe. The decorations are surprisingly shoddy and some pages have very visible lines on them. Nevertheless, this colorful manuscript managed to grab the attention of the British public at large, thanks to the written contents within. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Gawain was one of the knights of the Round Table in Arthurian legend. The story is one of classic chivalry, with various heroic actions taken by the titular characters. However, this story is much more complex than that. There are so many ways you can interpret all this, and because of that, I'm not going to go into any detail at all. Instead, I'll be focusing on the author. The author of these writings is probably not the person who did this manuscript, though they definitely had some sort of working relationship, because these writings are not seen on any other manuscript. This author, if they even had a name, did not sign any of their work, so they are referred to by the not name of Gawain Poet. Who this person could have been can be mildly understood within the lines of his poetry. His language is delicate, and he describes high-class life with such detail that it's not at all surprising that most people assume this was a highly educated and likely royal individual. But who exactly in the wide pantheon of English noblemen? Well, we can narrow things down by his dialect and writing. Based on that and context clues, we can narrow him down to roughly this area, and can narrow it down even further thanks to local landmarks such as a cave that may have inspired a location in one of his poems. But even with all this information about how inspired this guy was and how mythological and anthropological his thoughts were, we still don't know for sure who he could be. But there are many theories. But let's focus on one that is the most striking of them all. Hucheon is a hypothetical writer who could have existed, but we are not very sure. He is theorized to have written a few poems by various scholars, and the fact that we even got a name for this dude is all thanks to a single poem. Andrew of Winton wrote all of this stuff about him, presumably to introduce people to this noteworthy scribe. Attributed works to him include the ones mentioned above, The Great History of Arthur, and The Adventure of Gawain, the epistle also of Sweet Susan. The first and last ones are pretty easily identifiable, however the middle one interests us. Doesn't that sound familiar? Adventure of Gawain may refer to the story we mentioned earlier, plus the Green Knight and all. Thus some people suggest these two people are actually one and the same. And little Hugh over here, actual translation of his name by the way, was the Gawain Poet all along, though from the writing we do have the evidence is quite the contrary. The language is the key indicator here. The writings we know are from Hucheon and the Gawain writer have very distinctive dialects that are quite different from one another. They may very well not have even existed at the same time. There is precedent. but in all likelihood there's no connection whatsoever. Several other hypotheses have shown up regarding the actual work being described here. After all, Gawain and the Green Knight isn't the only medieval story written about the character, so we end at the crossroads, one most uncertain. That's about it for this section of the video. Whoever the writer for the Gawain adventure was, he was definitely influential enough for his anonymity to be well worth it. However, the writer in the next segment wasn't as lucky. Exiting the Middle Ages, we arrive in my favorite period of history. Between 1453 and 1800, everything in the whole wide world was changing. Technological advancements, revolutions galore, a whole litany of unidentified people of all sorts await us in this era. You finally get accurate and well-drawn depictions of these people. So let's just get into it. I got one more writer to cover before we get into some actually interesting and more well-documented individuals. In 1601, a book of poems was published featuring stuff from such writers as William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson. All of the other writers are well known and have other stuff written by them in our possession, as well as portraits, sorta. But the main attraction and the namesake poem was written by an individual that is shrouded in complete mystery. Love's Mother is the central and longest poem featured in the collection, also known by its full title, which is this. Now the funniest thing about this name right here is we don't know who this guy was either, which is just incredible. This guy probably not existing is unfortunate, because maybe we could have found which poem this was translated from, and maybe found out who this guy actually was, but no. His name is also like the name of two other poets squished together, so like, and also, see that alternative title, the Rosalind's Complaint? See that? This poem does not reference a Rosalind in any of the passages. In fact, it doesn't name any woman throughout its many lines. Though it does refer to the Phoenix as a human lady who is going to die without an heir. Sound familiar? Yes, this poem is most certainly referring to the current monarch at the presumed time of writing, Queen Elizabeth. Other details such as the supposed purity of the bird also give this away. But other than that, this is the only writing credited to this Robert Chester fellow that we know of. And to top it all off, this poem also has a lot to do with King Arthur as well. The way so many other more prolific writers contribute to this basically unknown guy's book of poems is a mystery on its own. He must have had a massive influence that we just don't know anything about. When I say this is the only thing we have from this guy, I mean it. We do not have records of this guy at all. There are no baptism records anywhere, and Robert Chester, especially from that era, isn't a unique name either. So we can only wonder about the true identity of this author. He may have been Welsh, I forgot to mention, but this poem is dedicated to one Sir John Salisbury, a Welsh nobleman who was a patron of similar poetry. That may narrow things down, but it still doesn't explain why so many other writers were down to contribute stuff to it. Remember, all of these guys were alive at the time, and these writings aren't anywhere else, and they all talk about the same thing. How the hell did any of this happen? Robert Chester remains one of the strangest writers of the Elizabethan era. There have been numerous identifications posited for Bob, but for now we haven't been able to reach a definitive conclusion like always. He dropped a single poem and then disappeared off the face of the earth. So little is known about this guy, some have even suggested that the name is a pseudonym. Why else would he have zero info on him? There's just a lot to take in when a writer such as this gets this much backing. We can only wonder. Maybe he was a nepo baby, who knows. Next up, the impetus for this whole video existing, and a case you've definitely heard of, at least in passing. In 1669, a prisoner bearing the name Eustace de Gueux was about to start his 34-year journey behind the walls of the first of 4 prisons he would reside in. His crime? Being an enemy of the state, probably during the reign of the French king at the time, Louis XIV. Now this wasn't unusual for him, not in the slightest. In fact, during his rule, many decadents were shown in France's infamous jails. He could have been described as a tyrant. He was the state after all. Aside from being a very opulent and long-lasting ruler, his method of doing things naturally led to him gaining many detractors, and his way of ruling definitely contributed to the French Revolution. One of these detractors, however, would be given a special treatment, all to hide his identity. This guy, Eustace, was more than likely a pseudonym, considering the great deal of care given to hiding the prisoner's face, and everything else he said as well. The cell was fitted with multiple doors so nobody could hear anything from him. With all this precaution, there was one last thing done to hide him from the world. A mask, one that has been lost to time, but was definitely not made from iron. Contemporary sources describe him having a black velvet mask, actually more like this. After some time, the mask changer would serve as a valet of sorts to one Nicolas Fouquet. Nicolas was imprisoned in the same jail as him for very similar reasons, though Nicolas was a very big important world guy, and Eustace even volunteering to do work for him puts his identity into question. Over the course of many years, he would move prisons at semi-random intervals, always by the same guy. He was such a long-staying prisoner that guards ended up calling him the Old Prisoner or something of the sort. Eventually, in his last day at the infamous Bastille, he would die. His tomb would bear the name Mascioli, and his age was listed at around 45? What the fuck? This man was in jail for 34 years and you're telling me they put him behind bars at age 11? During one of his many prison transfers, he was spotted by the crowd and soon, legends began to develop as to who this guy could have been. Even his jailer joined in, giving his own 2 cents to the whole debacle by suggesting that this guy could have been the president of parliament or some other high-ranking official, basically as a master troll before that phrase was even invented. While there are several possibilities in regards to an identity, we should begin this exploration with the most obvious thing. The name, Mascioli. Funnily enough, one of his few jailmates during his stays was one Equa Antoni Mattioli. Sounds very similar, doesn't it? Could have been the same guy, but wait. They were very clearly in separate cells. It's not like this guy pretended to be 2 different people at once. They were obviously not the same person, and the prison records show that Mattioli died in 1694. This name disparity may have been caused by mishandled prison records or deliberately done to confuse the public even more. Oh yeah, speaking of prison records, do they give us anything of note? Well, the French Revolution kinda made all those records fall in the hands of very angry Frenchmen, who in turn did many things to them. From what I can gather, however, the name Eustace d'Aguirre was still used in these. In the end, it really doesn't help our case at all. One of the earliest claims was this guy was either the son of Oliver Cromwell or the other son of Oliver Cromwell. Well, it would be quite funny, both of these people were clearly documented to be in England at the time. Well, how about the king's relative theory? One theory suggested by Voltaire of all people claims this man was none other than the illegitimate half-brother of the king. I mean, think about it. Why would Louis go out of his way to ensure the identity of this person was not known? If he wasn't related to him, some people could look at him and go, wait, he looks a little familiar. Well, do we have clues from the attendants at least? But people who worked in the prisons were also very unreliable. 2 attendants of the man in Bastille claimed he was a schoolboy, jailed at age 12 for writing verses against the Jesuits, which still doesn't explain the intense way in which his identity was hidden. I mean, even if he was paraded around with a mask, I feel like people would notice the short stature of the dude. Speaking of short stature, one of the many theories suggests this prisoner was a Moorish dwarf who was rumored to have impregnated the queen. There was a Moorish priestess who was rumored to be either the king's daughter or the queen's daughter. Who can say? Maybe that would explain the stature discrepancy. Some even say it was Fouquet himself, which should make the valet thing incredibly funny. Some real Jekyll and Hyde scenario. It's an interesting possibility, but prison records strike again. Also, come on now. How the hell are you gonna serve as a valet to yourself? The conspiracies continue. Alexandre Dumas, who would go on to write a fictionalized book about this guy, subscribed to the Brother series as well. However, all of these theories claim the sibling was the queen's doing. In what is a pretty strange verdict, many of these theories suggest the queen was pregnant and gave birth to an illegitimate son, instead of the son being of Louis' actual father, which seems way more likely. I mean, how the hell do you hide a baby for 9 months, and then give birth with so many people around you, literally? But that's not the end. Some claim this guy was actually Louis' father. Wait a minute, his dad died when he was like 5? No, you don't get it. This guy is the actual father of Louis XIV. Yes, somehow the queen blaming continues. Louis was born after his mother had several miscarriages throughout the course of 14 years. So people think that clearly, Louis Sr. could not bank for shit. However, Louis had another son, who looked very, very similar to his older brother. And also, here's Louis and his dad side by side at similar ages. There's also Louis' brother for good measure. This prisoner was definitely somebody that was well known enough to be hidden. The hardest thing with putting a face to this guy is that many of the candidates died before the said date in which the prisoner died, and the fictional candidates don't really make sense either. Eustace d'Aguirre, Mascioli, 2 separate names, dozens of possible identities. No matter who this prisoner might have been, he has surely left his mark in the popular subconsciousness. Right on, man in the Iron Mask. I support you. Between 1769 and 1772, an anonymous writer would contribute various pamphlets to an English newspaper before going silent, bearing the name Junius. This Junius fellow was highly critical of the king at the time, George III, as well as various other government officials, using a language that could only be described as very animated. He was full of genuine vitriol towards all of these individuals. This was so out of the ordinary at the time that the actual government tried to sue the publisher for ever having printed his things in the first place, for libel of course. And he was found not guilty. And with that simple strike of the hammer, free speech was changed forever. This was one of the first trials in modernish history that was about insulting the monarch that didn't directly end in execution. After a century of beheadings and crown unitings, the British government was firmly in the hands of the people. But George III, aka main antagonist of the American Revolution and very insane man, was very blatantly putting up mini ministers he liked best, trying to establish a cabinet of his own that would seem fair to the local potato farmer. Junius recognized such bluff and regularly berated corrupt Whig politicians. With powerful satire and amazing wit, his presence was short-lived but felt immensely. So that's the entire career of Junius. 3 years of spite that pissed off even the ruling house at the time, and as quickly as he appeared, he vanished, leaving behind only theories as to who he could have been, like everyone else on this list. When kings and ministers are forgotten, when the force and direction of personal satire is no longer understood, and when measures are only felt in the remotest consequences, this book will, I believe, be found to contain principles worthy to be transmitted to posterity. There are many theories regarding the identity of this author, theories that even touch upon the reasons for why he may have chosen that name, but I feel like that quote by one of his correspondents sums it all up very neatly. History is full of so many larger-than-life figures, so when a literally unknown author shakes the setting to such an extent, it brings about just a little more hope for us little guys. With that being said, we are halfway through the video topics, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. I don't usually say things like this, but I felt it would be quite appropriate for this quite lengthy video for my standards. We are almost done with the pre-modern period. We just have one more guy to discuss. Within the margins of human creativity, you will often find stuff that is incomplete for reasons we can't quite explain. Maybe the creator got bored with the project, maybe the head architect died, or maybe it was simply too big to be unearthed. But sometimes, there's just one guy to blame. And this leads nicely into our topic for this segment. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was composing a poem in a creative euphoria, Kubla Khan. He was intensely focused on the writing, possibly due to him being high off his ass during the process. He claimed to have finished the entire poem in his head, so he was just manifesting it into the physical world. However, some guy just showed up in his house for literally no reason, and the poem was left unfinished. He talked with this person on business from Porlock for an hour, but this person was never seen again. This is the only time we have heard about this gentleman, and we don't even know if he's real or not. I know faces in history can't all be winners. While some folks are massively influential and even get multiple books written about them, others just intrude into somebody's life and vanish into thin air. There are literally no sources on this guy, just the author's word, and that's it. Some suggest he was a figment of the author's imagination, like I suggested earlier, or simply some crazy guy who the author talked to for an hour for some reason. His remaining unnamed despite the author taking his sweet time with him is quite peculiar. Now, this segment was originally going to be about the Count of Saint Germain, a guy with a much more interesting legacy, but I changed it at the last second because honestly, this guy's too notable, and we can't just have 3 insane famous guys in a row. We gotta give shout out to like some random guy who walked into somebody's house, you know? You could have been that guy. That's the most relatable person in the video. Anyways, transitioning to the modern era. The chimneys are smoking, the mine shafts are smoking, the children are smoking. It's the dawn of a new age, and identifying people is getting way easier, in no small part thanks to the invention of photography and legal paperwork being more and more commonplace. The entire world is a very colorful mess of all sorts. And so what better way to start the latter half of this video than one of the brightest sparks of the early 19th century. During a quiet evening or afternoon in 1812, Ludwig von Beethoven wrote a love letter to a certain individual only he knew. However, that letter was never sent, and thus was left to rot away in his archive, until it was rediscovered sometime after his death. And when people got their hands on it, let's just say they were confused and started thinking. In an history, a woman named Julie Guicard was suggested, some random woman we know next to nothing about, aside from her cousin being a member of the Brunswick family. Side note, originally in this segment I suggested that Beethoven had no relation to her whatsoever, and while yes, this is true in the sense that maybe the letters weren't about her, he certainly was in love with her at some point in his life. Moonlight Sonata was dedicated to her actually, and suspicions of her being part of this whole thing is quite peculiar. It isn't too far-fetched like I previously suggested in the original script of this video. Continuing. Now, the Brunswick family held a very high admiration for the composer, unusually high in fact. One of the Brunswick sisters, Therese, wrote about Beethoven in a way that may suggest a romance or two. People speculated on their true relationship, despite her just writing in her diary that she just really admired the guy. But what's this? Her diary mentions one Louis as an object of desire, and well, this isn't a code name for Ludwig, it's another guy. Bit by bit, the Therese theory started to fall apart, and soon enough, people began to wonder who may have actually been this immortal beloved. However, more and more researchers began to narrow the list until landing on one lady, Therese's sister, one Josephine Brunswick. Josephine and Beethoven had a very special relationship, which was uncovered fairly recently in the 1950s. This relationship was made apparent by 13 love letters written by Beethoven to her specifically, not some unnamed mystery fellow. This thing started around the death of her first husband and continued for quite a while, until Josephine moved someplace else and married another guy in 1810. However, she gave birth to a child 9 months after the supposed meeting between Beethoven and his immortal beloved. I sure as hell think that's pretty suspicious. This key detail, a detail so conspicuous it was one of the reasons why people latched onto her in the first place, is certainly a game changer. We don't know for sure if she was in the place described in the letters, Prague. Beethoven sure was, but was Josephine there? This is where the other candidates come into the picture. These are way less substantiated. It's like saying since you and your friend who lives down the street are on very good terms, you two definitely bone every day, all night. See how ridiculous it is? Right. Even more letters discovered from Josephine upholds her as the most likely candidate, such as her wanting to be in Prague around June and being estranged from her husband for about 2 months, between June and July. And you know the fucking child that may be his, I don't know, I haven't done a paternity test, we still don't know for sure, but it's like a 95.5% chance it's her. In the cold streets of Nuremberg, Germany, a random boy was found wandering all alone in May 1828, disheveled and seemingly in a rough spot. The boy had never been seen before by anyone. With him he carried 2 letters, one addressed to Captain von Wessenig and another written by a lady giving the child away. The first letter was quite peculiar. It claimed that the author raised the kid on the exact date of October 7, 1812, but kept him locked indoors like some sort of prisoner. The stepfather basically said to the captain, "Hey, you have my stupid son that I hate. You can either let him become an army officer or hang him," which seems a little extreme, but what do I know. The second letter was the musings of a probable mother, but clarifying the little things such as the boy having the name Kaspar. And so, with 2 letters that had very similar handwriting for some reason, and even funnier, one of the letters mentioning how the boy had the exact same handwriting as the author, he was taken in by a nearby Good Samaritan, where he said such prophetic quotes as, "Horse! Horse!" He was questioned by the guy, but he couldn't remember anything. Taken to the police and questioned even harder. Held some recollection of stuff such as prayers and whatnot, but the general consensus was he was kinda mentally defective. After a while though, he started to give details as to what happened to him. According to the boy, he was raised in a dungeon. He was fed well and taken care of by a mysterious masked individual, who later brought him to Nuremberg with the hopes that he'd be adopted into a much, much better life. Considering the time period, I don't think it's the same guy as this one, but maybe some time travel shenanigans are involved. Somehow his caretakers believed this, and eventually, after a big kerfuffle in the Bavarian Court of Appeals, the town itself adopted him, and citizens regularly donated money for his own well-being. Numerous mysterious happenings began plaguing the young boy. First, he was attacked by a mysterious individual, receiving a resting S cut on his forehead. His attacker said the profound quote of, "You still have to die before you leave the city of Nuremberg." Apparently this was the same masked gentleman who left him in the city. He was held by a schoolmaster previously, but after this incident, he was transferred to some other guy who lived just down the street. Then, he accidentally shot himself in the head. He somehow didn't die from this accident, and he claimed, somehow fully lucidly, that the event happened like this. He was trying to retrieve a book when he fell from the chair he climbed on, and grabbed the gun which shot him. Some real Looney Tunes logic, I know. And his caretaker knew too. This is literally the weirdest excuse to leave house of all time. And his head wound? A wound that surely would have at least mentally incapacitated him for a bit. It wasn't like a bullet wound at all. It was just like a bump on his head or something. After that he floated around a bit, before some English noblemen took keen interest in him. He was adopted for the 3rd time by Lord Stanhope. Kaspar became Stanhope's pride and joy, and he took the guy to Hungary of all places in hopes that it would jog up his memory. Kaspar, probably making shit up like always, claimed he recognized some Hungarian phrases around town, and he even declared a Hungarian countess may have been his mother. You know, the same mother who wrote that letter. Right. Stanhope gave him away for the fourth and last time to Johann Georg Meyer, who disliked him to such a degree that he once wrote he ought to be killed. Speaking of killed, he was stabbed. He rushed into the house of his caretaker with a horrible stab wound in his chest, claiming he got attacked by some guy and he left a purse. And then he died. Police searched the spot he claimed to have left the purse, and lo and behold, they found it. It was a note that read, "Hauser will be able to tell you quite precisely how I look and from where I am. To save Hauser the effort, I want to tell you myself from where I come. I come from the Bavarian border, on the river. I will even tell you the name, MLE. And in his purse too. This attacker was very considerate to write a ransom note while the guy he was going to kidnap went home. So what happened? Well, as you probably may have guessed, Kaspar Hauser was probably the greatest con artist of all time. He was a clever bugger who tried his damn hardest to swindle as much money as he could, deliberately injuring himself multiple times to change houses to higher and higher tiers of society. But unfortunately, in his last attempt, he kinda stabbed himself too fucking hard. Unlike many other coronary rulings of self-inflicted stab wounds that sound suspicious, Kaspar is absolutely the kind of weirdo to accidentally stab himself too hard. Back in the day, the very stupid population thought this guy may have been a prince of some sort who was hidden away and then taken care of by the royal family he belonged to, which was pretty much completely debunked when his DNA was compared to that of said family, and it wasn't a match at all. It wasn't a conspiracy, just a very clever boy. And probably a masochist too, I don't know. Finally exiting Europe for once, we go beyond the pond to North America. In 1869, a middle-aged French guy was spotted in a very peculiar disposition. He was traveling around town in a predetermined path, wearing clothing made entirely of leather. This odd chap would soon attract the attention of numerous locals, and soon enough, people began to create legends down where he wandered. You see, Victorian people did what they do best and made stuff up about what happened to the lonely old man. In one tale, according to a guy who interviewed him, he was born in Lyon, France, bearing the name Jules Brugler. He tried to marry the daughter of some leather merchant, and when that failed, he purposely bankrupted his business and fled to the United States. And I guess he was cursed to walk the same path forever by some old witch. I don't know, that's not actually part of the story, but I bet your ass the public would believe it just the same. Because this is bogus. The guy spoke French, sure, but that was literally the only thing people knew about his origins. The man himself remained mostly silent on the matter, despite being bombarded by reporters all the time, and when asked questions, he would answer plainly and bluntly. A question like "Where are you from?" would receive the answer of "From the woods," which makes me question if this guy was actually human. The guy just wanted to be left alone. He was admitted to a hospital with a name we're not certain of, before he refused treatment and wandered off, dying only a year later. He was buried with the false name he was assigned by journalists, and despite the name allegedly provided to the hospital, the government still viewed him as an unidentified person. His grave was quite well made, considering how much the community adored his role. He remains significant in the way he evades identification despite him living much closer to our time. Well, if the previous entry would get DNA tested in 2024, surely this is our last chance of knowing who he is, right? In 2011, his grave was exhumed and his body wasn't there. Nevertheless, the pieces of wood and rusty nails that remained were taken to a new spot, where they remain to this day. Leatherman is also significant because he is the first person on this list that we have actual photographs of. Not drawings, not paintings, actual honest-to-God pictures of the man himself, which makes my job a lot easier. Godspeed. In 1900, the face of a young woman was making the rounds all over the art world. The elegant smile of the girl fascinated all who saw her. She became a muse of dozens of artists all over the world. The beauty of the Seine as she was known. The story goes she was a 16-year-old girl who drowned herself at the Seine. Her body was taken to the morgue when her caretaker was enchanted by her beauty or something, which was acceptable at the time, so he decided to create a death mask of her face. Side note, death masks are casts of dead people, cast in a variety of forms, from bronze to wax to plaster. They were usually created from the faces of more well-known people. These death masks are the closest we'll ever get to seeing these famous people in the flesh, without the embellishments of paintings. The young lady's death mask soon became a fashionably morbid piece of decoration, appearing in the homes of artists and hipsters alike, or the closest thing to hipsters at the time. Though the story was accepted at seemingly face value, soon enough many other stories started appearing, with nobody being sure as to what exactly happened to the woman. People began to doubt if she ever even drowned in the first place. I mean, that face doesn't really give us any clue as to what happened to her, and even if she did drown, I doubt she would make a face as serene as that. A young lady's face with an enigmatic smile of course drew comparisons with the Mona Lisa, but this was more than just a commissioned portrait of some noble woman. In fact, during this exact time, Mona Lisa was just some random neglected painting in the Louvre. So many works were inspired by her enchanting beauty, it's hard to count them all in one segment. And she even lent her face to a CPR dummy, not the one you're thinking of though, this one. Her unfortunate and somehow made her more famous. Her allure is similar to that of this picture, another beautiful way of ending your own existence. A celebration of life at the end. In many ways it is the Mona Lisa, with just a few key differences. Both are celebrating life in separate instances. One is flourishing in her brightest moment, while the other is accepting death at her lowest. One is well known, an upper-class woman in bright colors. You can't feel her, but her gaze pierces your very soul. The other is unknown, presumably a low-class lady in a plaster cast. You can't feel her, but her eyes are shut. Whatever the reason for her death may have been, at the very least you can find solace in the fact that her face being used for a CPR dummy has saved the lives of so many people. During most of the 19th century, documenting sports plays was kind of a fucking nightmare. Not only did you have to keep track of hundreds of people of all sorts entering any sort of competition, you also had to make sure they were who they said they were. And if you messed up, well, you just let some imposter to play with the best. A very similar case happened with NASCAR in the 70s, but the imposter was later identified, and not just that, his alias turned out to be his actual name, which is probably not the case for the century. Dolly Gray entered the NFL with literally no records to his name. Starting out with the St. Louis All-Stars, he played terribly during various games. So much so, the newspapers reported on it. He was sold shortly afterwards to the Green Bay Packers. The newspapers got confused once again, peddling false stories about him being an all-star football player when he wasn't even mentioned before in history prior to playing with the St. Louis All-Stars. The team lost that match, and Dolly was never seen again. Dolly's existence is one of the most confounding things in the entire history of American football. He faked his credentials in a way that was only possible during that time specifically, when things were still being figured out. Even his name, Dolly Gray, doesn't really give us anything in terms of actual info. Goodbye Dolly Gray was a patriotic chant from the Spanish-American War, and multiple people with the surname Gray played with the NFL during this time. There was, however, a Howard Gray who did play varsity football at Princeton. Presumably, he was used as one of the many sources Dolly used to create his elaborate backstory, and then basically wrote from there. Whatever he was, he certainly led a fascinating life. This was more than 100 years ago, a lot closer to our time, but nevertheless he evades identification. We may never know who Dolly Gray was, but him being here in the first place is a miracle in and of itself. A man with nothing, literally nothing, going toe-to-toe with the greats. There's some kind of lesson to be learned from that, at least. I think anyway. Make of that what you will. In the late 1980s, the Chinese political landscape was starting to boil like no other period in the nation's history. The unceremonious firing of one of the party's top leaders, and also many other factors, led to student protesters lining up the streets in numerous cities. The firing was rightfully criticized as a way of censorship. Hu Yaobang was drafting several policies a few years prior, and got unceremoniously ousted by the Chinese Communist Party. This reasoning was hidden from the public until 1989, when he died from a sudden heart attack. And when people found out about it, they were furious. The political climate had been bubbling up for quite some time now. Student demonstrations calling for democracy were getting to a point, and soon enough the Tiananmen Square protests began. A protest led mostly by students, calling for democracy as well as many other reforms. This was very hard on the Chinese government. There was basically two opinions. One which went, hey, we could maybe have a discussion with these people, and the other which was military action, scare them with military tactics. The government published an editorial in the party newspaper which called the protesters as anti-revolutionary. This made things a lot worse. Way worse, in fact. There were many other things that happened in the ensuing months. The protests soon turned to military action. Martial law was declared on May 20th, and soon enough tanks would start rolling in the square. Soldiers began to line up in the streets. Clashes were very brutal. Several people were arrested. But amongst all these people, amongst every single one of them, there was one guy. As a line of tanks rolled across the streets, this fellow would step in front of them and simply block their way. The tanks tried going around him, but he simply got in their way every time. He then climbed up the tank and then was taken away, never to be seen again. And while there were many people during these protests, and the fate of so many people are very clear, this man's fate is a complete mystery. China seems to come up a lot in my videos. Honestly, I don't know why. Maybe it's my fate to discuss China. After all, it's a pretty big country, full of many Chinese. After this incident, a British publication identified this man, Wang Weilin, a 19-year-old student protester who was later arrested and sent to jail. But the Chinese government and many other government officials have said they don't know what happened to the man. And thus we are left only to theorize what could have happened to him. Was he executed? Did he flee to Taiwan? Or is he still alive, just walking around in China? Adding on to the government thing, a Hong Kong-based human rights organization claimed to have taken government documents, and even those documents showed that the government did not know where he was. In a sea of the most highly surveilled country on the planet, a protester who simply just walked up to a tank is one of those people you'd think would be very easy to identify, but it turns out he is one protester who was never seen again. Being unknown is kind of like a decision. You choose to be not known. When you're doing something like this, your act isn't to be famous. It's just to stand for what you believe in. Last idea of an identity we have been given is one man named Jiang Weimin, who was imprisoned during the protests for supposedly hitting tanks with bricks, and was released in 2007 for good behavior, though he was jailed again and was released around 2017. After that, this guy is a complete mystery. We don't know what happened to him or where he is now. This is all just conjecture, obviously. At the end of the day, the only person who knows who this man is the guy himself. Maybe he's still alive somewhere. With that, we are done with this segment. Now, just 3 more to go. With the advent of message boards and VPNs, it is now easier and simultaneously harder to remain anonymous online. With so much information available at your fingertips, it wouldn't take any geniuses to find you if you slipped up even once. A single photo posted online or even your matter of speech could narrow you down if you're not careful. Which is why I'm thankful this video is sponsored by... No, just kidding, this video isn't sponsored. Though this does read like an ad prelude, doesn't it? Well, it's basically the reality we all live in now. You can choose to be anonymous, but nowadays it's way easier to find people, which is what makes remaining unidentified all the more improbable. One mysterious forebear comes to us from the mid-90s cracking scene. If you have ever pirated software online, you probably have a mild knowledge of what cracking is. It's a pirate's way of breaking secure content, aka cracking the protection of content and dumping them online. Old Red Cracker was a progenitor of this cracking business, active in 1996 and never again. Using various Usenet forums, he collected information and started writing one of the first cracking guides in internet history. His specific form of hacking was reverse code engineering, which is a form of reverse engineering. His foundation of High Cracking University was fundamental in establishing piracy as a pivotal form of media sharing online, which makes his fate all the more ironic. Old Red Cracker is one of the more obscure figures in this entire list. His entire Wikipedia article is just 84 words. And with our last 3 entries, we are reinventing the wheel. You can no longer theorize about any of these people, a holy trinity of unknownness. The reason why ORC remains anonymous is pretty simple. There's no reason to find him. He was already found through his disciples, and they will make sure to keep his word, changing the web one tap at a time. A teacher of righteousness for the modern era, if you will. In the penultimate chapter in our story, we see a very familiar face. This man, this guy, remember him? Every day, thousands of people report seeing this fellow with one brow in their dreams. Well, have you seen him? How is he? Can I have his number? Well, to backtrack a bit, this story first surfaced in 2008, and according to the dedicated website, it started to unravel piece by piece 2 years earlier. A patient described the guy to a New York psychiatrist, who drew his likeness, him showing it to a coworker and them recognizing it, and the domino effect soon after. This man has the uncanny ability of looking the same across all retellings, and yet doing different things in all of them. Like a dream version of Larry from Gumball, he finds himself doing every fucking job under the sun, and even doing very unholy things with the dreamers sometimes. The site's creator saw the guy in his dreams too, and he instructed him to make the website and tell everyone about it. But he was a fool. Now he's in everyone's dreams. This parasite just wanted to host. For decades, this man has remained a persistent yet ethereal figure in the global subconsciousness. Flyers bearing his likeness started appearing all over the world around the time he blew up, increasing his reputation by at least tenfold. and in 2010 he was almost adopted for a movie. In fact, let's do a micro what it was episode right now, because God knows when I'll make the next one, am I right? In 2010, an announcement was made stating that this guy would serve as the main protagonist in an upcoming movie all about him, trying to figure out why he's in the dreams of so many people. Allegedly, the production company behind it brought the rights for the website, though a quick checkup to the website's registry proves this otherwise. And after this single announcement in 2010, the movie was never mentioned again. Also, its host company also hosts Marketing.it. Huh? That's peculiar, but oh well, that's some nonsense coincidence probably. Or well, oh no. This man isn't real, and he's the only figure in this entire list that we are certain does not exist. His creator, an Italian sociologist, eventually conceded in 2010 that this man was a social experiment done as a guerrilla marketing trick. Safe to say it worked wonders, and this man is one of the few cases in this video that still regularly gets stuff made about it. The face for the website was made using a flash game and the rest, well, it's pretty easy to write it all down if you're an actual sociologist like Andrea Natella. How funny it is that our next to last entry isn't even real. After so many entries of potential people, we arrive at the zenith, a fake, an unknown face of history that does not belong to anyone. What would you do if you were the only person left on Earth? Humanity has gone completely extinct. Everyone you know is dead, and you are the sole survivor. This is a scenario posited by many fictional stories. This idea that people can just vanish into thin air one day is a scary concept. But people rest easy in their comfortable surroundings, knowing full well such a thing can never happen to them. But it sure has happened to others. Imagine living through your second death, facing the unknown while everyone you knew has died, and your name long forgotten. Imagine being alive in biology only. The true tragedy of being unknown is at the end of the day, your worst survives in what you leave behind. And if you're just a regular human being, maybe your face might attract some attention, but it's fragile. You don't have a name at all. You've died twice. Maybe it was your intent, maybe it wasn't. Who can say? What is left of your legacy when your name gets erased? The ongoing genocide of Native Americans, especially those in the South who remain uncontacted, is truly one of the most horrifying reminders that the post-contact consequences are still being felt today. These people are the few in government databases who are undocumented. Their tribes have names, sure, usually a placeholder title instead of an actual one, but individual members? Nothing. And try as the government might to protect these groups, people will always find ways to screw with them. So with that being said, this entry is about the man of the whole. What he went through can only be described as a nightmare. Born in the 1960s, he was brought up in an unknown tribe. When he was young, his entire tribe was massacred right before his eyes. But he survived. From his perspective, even if he saw other people every now and then, his entire world ended right then and there. For 50 years, he lived in complete and total isolation in the forest of Brazil, occasionally appearing in documentary films and being seen by routine checkup crews. He lived through his second death, literally saw his entire people get massacred. And yet, despite everything, he died in peace. His body was found in August 2022, with no signs of a struggle. He simply laid on a hammock, closed his eyes, and dissolved. And somehow through it all, I just hope he was finally reunited with his people. As it turns out, there are many cases of last members of tribes, definitely way more than the ones we have on record. The man of the whole saw the absolute worst of humanity, and yet he kept on living, using stuff he learned himself or was taught long ago. He lived without a name, and died. Everything about his culture, his people, his ancestors, his language, completely ceased to exist with him. Oftentimes I wonder how I will be remembered by those around me. Life can be tough, and sometimes everyone is seemingly against you. You go through the hardest times. You do so much just for your achievements to be seemingly in vain. Writing this video has helped me grasp with the concept of being forgotten and name only. Legacy is forever, and the marks you have left on this earth will remain, no matter how small. Thank you guys for your patience, thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.